Hello and welcome to the Unsung Cyberhero Adventures TV network. Today's show focuses on answering the questions, what is the most devastating cybercrime perpetrated against organizations of all sizes, and what happens next? Stay tuned to find out. I'm your host, Gary Berman. Our mission is to shine the light on the people and organizations who keep us safe online while at work, home, and school, and to serve as a business-to-business networking platform for the cybersecurity and IT communities. We've learned that 55% of human communications is nonverbal. That's why we include a video feed so that you have the option of seeing our guests or simply to just listen. That's also why we're called a TV network. We're all about information sharing and business-to-business networking. You never know who you're going to connect with and how you'll be able to maximize opportunities resulting from hearing from our guests. This is especially valuable right now that the community's primary way of conducting business, conferences, has been put on hold for the foreseeable future. Well, we have two incredible guests on today's shows. Stephanie Snyder is the SVP and Commercial Strategy Leader of Cyber Solutions at Aon. Her industry focus includes technology companies, manufacturers, retailers, life science companies, and financial institutions. She has experience with Cyber and E&O coverage as both a broker and underwriter. Hey, Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Hi, Gary. Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Daniel Tobok is the CEO at Cytelligence, an Aon Cyber Solutions Company. Cytelligence is the elite force of global cybersecurity. Daniel is a seasoned and serial entrepreneur with extensive expertise in cybersecurity, and he has personally participated in more than 2,500 digital forensic investigations after or during cyber attacks. Hey, Daniel, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Well, my first question is, Daniel, when do you sleep?
Yeah, the joke is always sleep is overrated. If you get up an hour earlier, you can actually have a 25-hour day. But jokes aside, in between attacks, between 12 and 6 a.m. Yeah.
Exactly. And given your vast experience, how would you describe the current state of ransomware?
Ransomware is definitely what I would call a true epidemic out there as a global issue. Ransomware today accounts for about 52% of all of the cyber attacks globally. What's really interesting, Gary, is the threat actors have really mobilized and over the years realized the intense lucrative market and opportunities for them in perpetrating their crimes through ransomware. So it's definitely a problem.
And would you say it's more of an increase in attacks or the severity of the attacks, or is it a little bit of both?
The volume and severity has definitely gone up. I mean, when you look year after year, there is a double and triple digits growth in the amount of attacks that are out there. I mean, even when you look at during our COVID, intense time between March to July, there's been an increase in attacks. They just really pivoted from corporate networks to more of the private networks, right at home offices and remote locations where everybody are working. The severity has also gone up because they no longer just attack and encrypt the data. They're now looking to exfiltrate data and hold everybody for additional extortion or as a backup plan.
So speaking of backup plans, Stephanie, how are insurers viewing ransomware attacks and the trade-off between attempted recovery and paying a ransom? I mean, should an organization pay?
Well, I think when you talk about ransomware attacks, it's all about business continuity and disaster recovery and ensuring that organizations are prepared. We all know that the most overused phrase in cybersecurity is it's not if, it's when. I would say that when it comes to how insurance carriers are looking to support companies from a cyber extortion and ransomware standpoint, they are trying to ensure that the companies are prepared for these types of attacks, that they do have appropriate backups, that they do have an incident response plan in place, that it's tested, that that organization is doing cybersecurity awareness training for its employees. So all of that's really a critical part of the underwriting. But to answer your question, to pay or not to pay, frankly, that's a business decision that every organization needs to make, whether they are insured or not insured. It comes down to how fast can an organization get back up on its feet? How much support do they need from a incident response standpoint, from a computer forensics standpoint? And what's the potential loss to that organization if they do have an ongoing outage as a result of a ransomware attack? Ransomware becomes a lot more complicated when you talk about the business disruption. It's not so much about the ransom amount, though, really we have seen an increase in ransomware demand amounts. But frankly, it's more about the outage to these organizations that they can't run their business. And I think it's of even greater concern when you have a distributed workforce. And then you take that one step further. Now we're seeing ransomware attacks that turn into data breaches because we're seeing these bad actors steal the information and then post it to the public internet. So to pay or not to pay is really dependent on that organization. But certainly I would say cyber insurance is a really great vehicle to help support organizations in a lot of ways, should they have any type of ransomware incident.
So in your opinion, are attacks driving an increase in claims, which are then driving an increase in rates?
So I would argue that attacks are not necessarily driving an increase. I would say this. I would say that we are seeing more claims. Claims are resulting in more underwriting being done by the insurance carriers to ensure that companies are prepared. Certainly, ransomware is a concern for insurance carriers. But I think that really it comes down to these insurance carriers trying to help organizations be prepared and bring forth, whether it be a panel of vendors that can help them proactively or a panel of vendors that can help them reactively really work to address any type of issues that they may have.
And, do you think that insurance are beginning to require more of the firms they insured, about preventive measures and, cyber hygiene and awareness? I mean, how's all that going?
I think that it's critical. Insurance plays a part in kind of the overall, an overall cybersecurity methodology that any organization can implement. At Aon, we have a concept we call the cyber loop. And what that is that's looking at different areas that organizations can address to really, overall raise the bar on their cybersecurity posture. Organizations need to look at assessment, they need to look at quantification, they need to look at insurance, and they also need to look at incident response readiness. And if you kind of think of these four areas in a circular manner, you're going to see different organizations that are going to enter the cyber loop at different points. Ideally, an organization is not entering the cyber loop after having an incident. That would probably be the worst place to enter the cyber loop. But the whole concept is that as organizations kind of enter into the cyber loop and they circle through the cyber loop, they're going to be able to derive greater amounts of data about their own posture and continue to improve their overall posture. The fact is, it's never ending. It's not linear. Cybersecurity and approaching cybersecurity will never be a linear process where you just tick a box and then you're done. It really is a circular process that you need to continue to iterate and iterate and iterate.
And speaking of which, I'll turn this to either one of you. You did this great 2020 cybersecurity risk report. Can you share with our audience, some of the key takeaways of that report?
So I can start off, and then certainly I'd love to have Daniel's perspective as well. But the 2020 cybersecurity risk report really tried to draw attention to areas of cyber risk that organizations may not necessarily appreciate. Cyber risk touches an organization literally everywhere. It's very ubiquitous in nature. And oftentimes we see organizations that are looking very directly at their network, looking to secure that network. But the fact is, cyber risk it sits outside of that network, it sits inside of that network. And frankly, it touches things such as HR, it touches things such as vendor management, it touches mergers and acquisitions, it touches the individual executives that sit on the board of directors. but all of those in different ways. And these bad actors, as Daniel was discussing, they're after the money. And they're after trying to exploit vulnerabilities of human behavior. And so we have seen losses from retirement accounts, for instance, where, using some type of phishing campaign, bad actors have been able to get individuals' credentials to be able to log into their account and siphon funds. That's not necessarily an area of cyber risk that is front and center for most organizations, especially as they are utilizing a third-party custodian to house those funds. But it's just an example that we discuss in the cybersecurity risk report that really helps to underscore that organizations need to think differently when it comes to cybersecurity.
So Daniel, just to build on what we just heard, so let's say unfortunately an organization is victimized. What are they supposed to do? I mean, let's talk about incident response from your perspective.
Absolutely, and I just want to echo another point from Stephanie. It's important to understand, a famous bank robber once said, when he was arrested and asked, "Why do you rob banks?" His answer, because that's where the money is. The reason all these attacks are happening is because the threat actors are realizing where is the information that they want to go after. Everybody have that information. It's no longer just government or banking, right? So this is the reason they're very active into everybody's account, so everybody can become a victim. From an incident response point of view, once, it's extremely important to be proactive, because that is really one of your best methods or weapons to deter you as a victim. I always say this analogy, there's kind of three homes there, one with a lock, one with a lock and an alarm, and one with a lock, alarm, and a very hungry German Shepherd. There's a reason the bad guys are not coming to where the German Shepherd is, right? It's the same thing when it comes to cybersecurity hygiene. Again, to echo what Stephanie said, it's really a loop. It's really a circular type activities, and it's not one or the other. It's not a checklist. So when you get victimized, or if you are a victim of an incident, really one of the things to do is really bring in somebody professional to understand what has occurred. It's unfortunately not one of those do-it-yourself projects over a weekend, and you can't really Google your way out of this, right? It's one of those things that either you're prepared or you're not. If an incident has occurred, you really got to have somebody professional help you. Having an incident response plan is critical. It's literally critical, because at a moment of panic, at a moment where emotions are very high, you don't want to start scrambling to think, what should I be doing here? Who do I call? Do I call the wrong person? Documentation, legalities, and so on. So an incident response plan is very important. From a proactive nature, cyber awareness training your people on what can actually happen and what the threat actors are often is extremely critical to any size organization. I often hear organizations saying, I only have 5 people on the team, or we only have 20 people on the team. We're too small to do this. You're not too small. That's right. It's almost like the analogy is when you look at 20 years ago and nobody really was locking the doors and nobody really had an alarm, right? Or monitoring. We have to be able to evolve to understand the threats that are out there. But when you do get into an incident, again, you got to either pull off that incident response plan, you got to call somebody professional. But one very critical thing that I always say, do not start overwriting and downloading software from the internet to so-called play investigator. You can only harm the actual forensic artifacts that companies like us need in order to put together the puzzle to understand what has occurred and actually be able to plug the holes that the threat actors used to expose the vulnerabilities in your network.
Yeah, I understand one of the first things you want to do is just lock down the affected systems, if you can identify them. Is that true?
Absolutely. It's almost, I always describe this as as a crime scene, and you got to trot the chalk around the crime area, and it should be contained. Imagine if we had a crime scene and the yellow chalk is around the potential crime scene, and people are just walking around and having a sandwich and dropping coffee all over it, and then somebody actually has to put it together. Is the same in cyber, just virtual.
Wow, that's a very good and somewhat scary analogy. Stephanie, so let's go back to the cyber loop that you described and talk about recovery. I mean, what are the best practices to, help an organization recover?
Well, I think, certainly going back to what Daniel just said, you need to make sure that you have an adequate response. You have an incident response plan. You are testing that incident response plan. That's critical. I would say that cyber insurance is probably one of the best ways to help protect the balance sheet against the financial impact as a result of a breach. When you think about a breach, when you think about a ransomware attack, there's just so many aspects to it. And you have to think about it from a potential liability standpoint to third parties. You have to think about it from a regulatory fines and penalties standpoint. I mean, we're only seeing the regulatory environment become more and more challenging with GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation in the EU, with the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act. We're only going to see more and more regulation, and there's associated fines and penalties that come with a breach. But then you have to think about the first party costs to the organization in terms of the expenses an organization is going to incur. Absolutely any organization is going to incur computer forensics costs first and foremost. From a cyber insurance claim standpoint, we see that as being the bulk of the cost for the claims that we see. So, but beyond computer forensics, you have potential notification costs, credit monitoring costs, legal costs, PR costs. Oftentimes, a breach is a reputational issue for an organization. So PR does actually play a part in it, and being able to remedy a breach very quickly is critical. And we've seen some companies in the public eye over the past several years do a very good job after having a breach, and we've also seen some companies do a very bad job. So it's important to consider all the costs that go along with that. And then going back to what I was previously talking about, there is a business disruption aspect that comes with it in terms of any type of income loss on that future revenue, as well as those extra expenses that are incurred by the organization as you're trying to get back up and running and back to normal operations. And then if we're talking ransom, you have a ransomware demand as well. So you kind of piece all of this together, and that's a lot of money. And for some organizations, sadly, we've seen them go from breach to bankruptcy. And that's nothing that any organization wants to have to shut their doors as a result of a breach. So, that's why I tend to think from a recovery standpoint, cyber insurance is just so critical for organizations. It goes hand in hand with having that incident response plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And Daniel, just to build on that, can you fill our audience a little bit more about the nature of threats? Are they changing now that we're in the COVID-19 environment and everybody's working at home? Are people just, more vulnerable than ever?
Absolutely. We saw a very interesting pattern by the threat actors that really started in December and January, even pre what I call a global pandemic, right? Just when news was coming out of China about the pandemic, and it started moving right to Europe and then basically North America and so on, we really saw the threat actors pivoting their activities and actually starting to attack. First of all, the phishing scams start going up about COVID and information from the CDC and various government based on that country. And then basically as March hit and the world has started going into a remote type protocol where everybody are leaving the office and working from remote locations, we start seeing the bad guys pivoting into searching people of particular organizations and pivoting into attacking their personal network, something that we've never really seen Because until COVID, only about 11 to 14% of all cyber attacks were on actual home networks. Mainly were all corporations, pre that, right? It was a very small number, very small amounts for ransom. We're talking about between $300 up to $1,000 versus the average attack, which was 50 to about, $400,000. Just to give you, in terms of calibers, they would never attack, regular consumers. But what we have seen is that the bad guys realize that it's easier to attack people at home than to attack people and fish them out in a corporate environment for a couple little reasons. In the corporate environment, there's just more protection in the corporate network, right? There's DMZs, there's extra layers of, intrusion detection systems and more firewalls and so on and so on. And you're using also more or less a safe internet connection. Well, guess what? One of the biggest problems during the COVID time is that when people are using their networks at home, those networks are extremely weak, right? And not to alert anybody here, it's really more of an education process, but more than 78% of home routers still have their default username and password on them from the telco provider, irrelevant of the provider, right? And most of those passwords, with a very simple Google search, or if somebody's a little bit has more experience on the dark web, you should actually buy every single username and password for a particular provider in North America on the dark web for under $85, right? So this is one of the problems, is most people did not really think about that, and they never segregated that, because, to everybody's opinion, who cares if somebody accesses my router while we're watching Netflix? They're going to realize that I'm behind one season in one of my favorite shows. Like, who cares, right? Well, the problem is that the bad guys have realized that if they are able to bypass those security measures into your home, they're able to start sniffing out information on your personal computer, even if you're using your corporate computer, and even though you're using a VPN to access your corporate information, they're able to access your computer. And then basically they're able to compromise your emails, compromise your system, use your computer as a piggyback to the corporate network, and so on and so on. And that's the reason we've seen hundreds of percentages increase in actual ransomware and cyber attacks during COVID.
Yeah, and just to build on that, now kids are at home, so it used to be bringing your device to work. Now all devices are at the same place, so you can have family members using laptops and vice versa. And Stephanie, what are your thoughts about that? This convergence of all this technology in the home.
Well, I would say that I agree. There is certainly a convergence of technology in the home, which I think raises potentially more risk. But I would even say that it's outside of just thinking about the technology. It's also about the applications that are being used. You have kids at home. They're on social media. Perhaps their parent is a CEO of an organization. It kind of goes back to what we're talking about with the 2020 risk report. There are these exposures from a cybersecurity standpoint for executives that you wouldn't necessarily think about. I think what COVID has really done is it's made organizations think differently about the importance of their technology platform to run their business. And as all of us are operating using VPNs, distributed technology, remote desktops. Certainly the bad actors are trying to exploit this. And so just as technology is critical during the pandemic, cybersecurity around that technology should be just as critical for organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And to both of you, how have you had to adjust your approach to deal with all this and to help clients recover?
One of the ways, from one side, what's really interesting is that, with the COVID type era, work performance or strategy, most of our clients before would want to actually have a physical meeting and, how fast can we meet with you and how fast can we see you? with the use of technology, which has become more popular, again, with Zoom, WebEx, any one of those, we have become more efficient, and we're able to come up with new automated tools just to be able to react quicker to customer needs and to be able to handle more in a quicker and more efficient manner, which has been very interesting. Stephanie, what do you think?
I mean, I would say from a cyber insurance standpoint, I mean, the greater concern is really around the length of time that it takes organizations to recover from an attack. When you have a fully distributed workforce, that's a lot of laptops you could potentially need to replace. So, we're really seeing things take longer in terms of recovery, and the longer it takes, the more it drives up costs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in your opinion, how important is it to pick the right incident response firm?
I'll comment on that. I mean, and this is really without being cheeky. I think it's one of the most critical decisions you can make outside of your cyber insurance. I mean, those two go hand in hand. It's very important to understand that our industry got very saturated over the last couple of years with different providers. And it's really not one size fits all. It's really got to be about the right organization that understands what's out there on top of all the trends and all the threats and has the right intelligence gathering. But it's also a firm that is able to understands the industry and is able to work with the client on their terms. And that's very important. Just to echo what Stephanie said, with COVID and a distributed workforce, you no longer have the ability to go into an office and investigate 20 or 30 or 50 laptops. You could have, those 20, 30, 50 laptops in a radius of over 100 miles between each other from different various geographical locations of the workforce. So it makes it a lot more challenging. Not every firm can jump and actually be able to reach locations. Not every technology can accommodate virtualization of forensics. So that's very important.
Yeah, and I would add to that literally the worst time to be negotiating an SOW is after you've had a breach. So you don't want to be arguing over contractual language when your entire network is not working and your employees can't do a thing. So like Daniel said, critical to have the right incident response firm, but I would say critical to also have them on retainer so that if you do have a breach, it's already pre-negotiated and it's a phone call away and immediately they can get moving to get your business back up and running.
Well, absolutely.
Gary,
yeah, go ahead.
Just to echo another comment Stephanie made before, we've literally seen organizations who were fairly financially healthy go bankrupt over a week because they couldn't get the assistance and they couldn't react quick enough. And they just realized that they're done. Their networks are done, clients are canceling. And when you already have external pressures such as COVID and economic hardship, that really pushes you over the edge. And it's very unfortunate to see that.
I typically don't say what I'm about to say, but since you're bringing it up, I understand very well. I mean, many of the viewers of the show know that I was the CEO of a marketing company that was hacked by APT for a period of years by trusted insiders, and I lost several $1 million and eventually had to shut down the company and lay off over 100 people. So I can say for sure what Daniel and Stephanie are saying is true. And Stephanie, your last word, is there anything you'd like to share to amplify your mission for our audience?
So I would just encourage viewers to go on to Aon's website. It's aon.com/cyber solutions and take a look at some of our great thought leadership. We have white papers in terms of the 2020 cybersecurity risk report. We also have our Cyber Loop white paper, which we mentioned, as well as a ton of thought leadership and blogs. It's a wealth of information and it's free. Free is always great. So just encourage your viewers to give our website a visit.
Okay, Daniel?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, there's a lot of information on the website, what I call free education, which is you can't get enough of. And it's really geared towards educating and helping organizations just to be better prepared. My words of gospel is really be prepared, or basically become irrelevant. You really have to educate your people. You have to be proactive in your approach. This is one of those things you can't just provide a check mark and just move on. The better prepared you are, because an incident will occur one way or another, right? It's either you're going to know about it or you don't, but it is going to occur. It's just be prepared, and that's the best way to combat any type of cybersecurity issue.
Well, on that note, thanks so much to you, Stephanie and Daniel. And you are the reason that we do this show, because the only time you hear about hacks or cybercrime is when the bad people win. And we wanted to shine the light on the unsung heroes who toil in anonymity to keep us safe. And you two are incredibly great examples of that. So thanks so much. So to learn more, we'll also have information and contact information from Stephanie and Daniel. And if you would like to be a guest on our show, just send an email to Gary@cyberherocomics.com.